The Kavarian Stellar Military Academy orbited a binary star system in neutral space, which was perhaps the most diplomatic way of saying it floated in the middle of nowhere, so that no single species could claim bragging rights. For 300 cycles, it had churned out the galaxy's finest military officers, tacticians, and peacekeepers. The Academy's motto, carved in 17 different languages across its main archway, proclaimed, "Excellence through unity, strength through diversity." What the motto failed to mention was that some species considered themselves significantly more excellent and diverse than others. The student body represented 47 member worlds of the Galactic Collective, each species bringing their own particular brand of superiority complex to the institution. The Vryn, with their 4 arms and natural exoskeletons, dominated the hand-to-hand combat rankings. The Kelthari, whose 3-lobed brains processed tactical scenarios at speeds that made quantum computers jealous, ruled the strategy simulations. The Morvathi, built like ambulatory mountains with hide thick enough to stop plasma rounds, owned every endurance record worth mentioning. And then there were the humans. Humans occupied a peculiar position in the Academy's ecosystem. They had joined the Galactic Collective only 2 generations prior, which in galactic terms meant approximately 15 minutes ago. Their homeworld, Earth, carried a Deathworld classification of 7.8 out of 10, a rating that most species found either deeply concerning or utterly hilarious, depending on their disposition. Deathworlds were planets where everything, from the gravity to the wildlife to the weather patterns, seemed personally invested in murdering the inhabitants on a daily basis. Most civilized species evolved on garden worlds, peaceful spheres where the greatest natural threat might be an unusually aggressive pollinating insect, or perhaps a light drizzle. The concept of a planet actively trying to kill its residents struck them as cosmically unfair, like the universe had accidentally set the difficulty to nightmare mode and forgotten to adjust it. Earth, by all accounts, was a nightmare that had gained sentience and developed a creative streak. The Academy had accepted human cadets for the past 5 cycles, and the results had been mixed. They performed adequately in academics, showed surprising aptitude in creative problem-solving, and possessed an almost disturbing capacity for stubbornness. What made them truly noteworthy, however, was their physical capabilities. Humans evolved under 1.0 g gravity, breathed an oxygen-nitrogen atmosphere that would qualify as spicy on most worlds, and came equipped with an adrenaline response that essentially turned them into berserkers when sufficiently motivated. The collective's xenobiologists had published several papers suggesting that humans were less naturally evolved and more deliberately weaponized by a sadistic deity. None of this particularly bothered Cadet Rexith Voron as he stretched his 4 arms in the Academy's primary gymnasium. Rexith was Vryn, a species renowned for their martial prowess and even more renowned for their unshakable belief in their own martial prowess. He stood 7 feet tall, his natural carapace gleaming under the facility's overhead lights, each of his 4 hands wrapped in the traditional combat gloves of his people. "She will fold in the first exchange," Rexith announced to his companions, his voice carrying the harmonic overtones that characterized Vryn's speech. "These Deathworlders are all endurance and no technique. Brute force wrapped in arrogance." Beside him, Cadet Thornax rumbled in agreement, though Thornax's rumbles could have passed for minor seismic events. The Morvathi stood 8.5 feet of solid muscle and stone-like hide, built along the general principles of what if a mountain decided to attend military school. His species had never met a problem they could not solve by being larger and more immovable than it. "3 of us seems excessive," Thornax observed, his voice like gravel being ground in a cement mixer. but I appreciate the efficiency. We make our point, establish the proper hierarchy, and still have time for the evening meal. The third member of their trio said nothing, which was typical. Cadet Zil Nth of the Kelthari rarely spoke when calculation served better. Her slender, almost fragile-looking frame belied a nervous system that operated at roughly 3 times the speed of most species. In combat, this translated to reaction times that bordered on precognitive. She had already run 17,000 simulations of the upcoming engagement in her mind, adjusting variables for every possible outcome. The results were not as unanimous as her companions believed, which troubled her. But Zilyenth had learned that sometimes her compatriots needed to learn lessons the hard way. The gymnasium itself was a marvel of engineering, a vast space that could reconfigure its internal structure to simulate environments from across the known galaxy. Today, it had been set to standard configuration. A flat, rubberized floor spanning roughly 200 feet in diameter, surrounded by observation galleries where other cadets had begun to gather. Word had spread, as word always did in an institution filled with young beings desperate for entertainment between classes on orbital mechanics and interspecies diplomatic protocol. So the Vryn finally decided to put the human in her place. Someone muttered in the growing crowd. About time. The way she walks around like she owns the combat courses is insufferable. I heard she broke the endurance record in week 2. Breaking records does not equal combat effectiveness. Those are controlled environments. This is different. Rexith smiled, his mandibles clicking with satisfaction. The human had indeed been making waves since her arrival at the academy, 6 months prior. She had not been openly disrespectful, which somehow made it worse. She simply existed with a quiet confidence that suggested she knew something everyone else did not, and several species found this attitude intolerable. The challenge had been issued 3 days ago through proper channels. The Academy allowed such contests within reason, viewing them as valuable learning opportunities and practical applications of training. The rules were simple: hand-to-hand combat only. No weapons, no enhancements beyond natural biological capabilities. Match concluded when one side could not continue or yielded. Rexith had proposed a 3-on-1 engagement, which raised eyebrows among the faculty, but violated no specific regulations. If the human wanted to be taken seriously, she could prove herself against superior numbers. That was the warrior's way. The human had accepted with a response that consisted of one word: sure. That casual dismissal had only reinforced Rexith's determination to teach her proper respect. The gymnasium's main entrance hissed open, and the ambient conversation died like someone had flipped a mute switch. She walked in alone. No entourage, no supporters, wearing the Academy's standard training uniform. Gray compression material designed to accommodate various body types across 47 species. On her, it looked almost comically mundane, like she had wandered in from a light jog rather than a formal challenge. Cadet Lyra Chen stood 5 feet 8 inches tall, which placed her in the adorably compact category by galactic standards. Her dark hair had been pulled back in a simple ponytail, revealing features that most xenobiologists classified as persistently juvenile. Smooth skin, large eyes, a general lack of intimidating features like fangs, horns, or venomous spines. She looked, several cadets had noted with barely concealed amusement, like someone's younger sibling who had wandered into the wrong facility. What made observers uncomfortable once they looked past the non-threatening exterior were her eyes. Dark brown and absolutely steady. They carried the kind of calm that suggested either supreme confidence or complete ignorance of danger. Given that she had survived Earth for 18 years before joining the Academy, ignorance seemed unlikely. Lyra crossed the floor with an easy gait, her footfalls silent against the rubberized surface. She did not bounce or swagger or perform any of the pre-combat posturing that most species engaged in. She simply walked to the designated combat circle, stopped at its edge, and looked at the 3 cadets waiting for her with an expression of polite interest. "Good evening," she said, her voice carrying clearly in the suddenly silent gymnasium. Human vocal cords, the observation deck had learned, could produce remarkable volume when necessary. "Are we ready, or do you need more stretching time?" Rexith's mandibles clicked in irritation. The human's tone was not mocking, which somehow made it worse. She sounded genuinely curious, like she was asking about scheduling rather than facing 3 of the Academy's top-ranked combat specialists. "We are prepared," Rexith responded, stepping into the circle. "Are you certain you wish to proceed? There is no shame in acknowledging that this engagement is beyond your capabilities." Lyra tilted her head slightly, a gesture that her xenobiology instructors had identified as a human indicator of curiosity or confusion. "Why would I acknowledge something that isn't true? But I appreciate your concern." In the observation gallery, several cadets exchanged glances. The human's audacity was either going to be spectacular entertainment or cautionary tale. Possibly both. The presiding instructor, a weathered Talneri with more combat experience than most species had recorded history, stepped forward. "Standard challenge rules apply. Engagement continues until yield, incapacitation, or my intervention. Lethal force is prohibited. Permanent injury is prohibited. Temporary pain and ego damage are expected. Combatants, acknowledge understanding." "Acknowledged," the 4 voices responded in unison, though Lyra's came with a slight smile that did absolutely nothing to ease Rexith's growing irritation. "Take positions." Rexith, Thornax, and Zillenth spread out, forming a triangle around the human. It was standard pack tactics, designed to eliminate defensive options and create multiple threat vectors. Lyra simply stood in the center, hands loose at her sides, weight balanced on the balls of her feet. She was not even in a proper combat stance. The instructor raised one appendage. "Begin." Rexith moved first, which was his right as the challenge's instigator. Vrin's speed was legendary, 4 arms providing both redundancy and overwhelming offensive capability. He closed the distance in a blur, high right arm striking for the head, mid-left arm sweeping for the midsection, his other 2 limbs already positioning for follow-up attacks. It was a technique that had earned him top marks in every combat evaluation. Lyra was not there when his strikes arrived. She had dropped low beneath his high strike and pivoted to her left with a speed that made Zillenth's eyes widen in the split second available. The human's leg swept out in a tight arc, her foot connecting with the back of Rexith's leading knee. Vrin's legs bent forward, not backward. Lyra seemed aware of this, because she was not trying to hyperextend the joint. She was simply removing its structural support while Rexith's momentum carried forward. The Vrin cadet's face met the gymnasium floor with a sound that made everyone watching wince in sympathetic pain. Lyra was already moving, rolling to her right as Thornax's massive fist hammered down where she had been standing a microsecond earlier. The impact created a small crater in the supposedly reinforced flooring. "Expensive tastes," Lyra commented, regaining her feet with a fluid motion that looked effortless. Thornax swung again, because Morvathi combat doctrine focused heavily on the principle of hit it until it stops moving, then hit it several more times to be sure. His fist carved through air as Lyra swayed backward, the wind from his punch rippling her hair. The observation deck had gone absolutely silent. Several cadets had their mouths hanging open, which looked particularly dramatic on species with multiple jaws. Zillenth entered the engagement with the calculated precision her species was known for. While Thornax provided overwhelming offense, she struck from the blind angle, her fist targeting the nerve cluster at the human shoulder. A successful hit would paralyze the arm and significantly reduce defensive options. Her fist met empty air as Lyra's shoulder simply was not there anymore. Humans, Zillenth's racing mind cataloged, were disturbingly flexible. Lyra's counter came faster than Kelthari combat predictions could fully process, which should have been impossible. Her elbow drove upward, catching Zillenth under the chin with precisely calibrated force. Not enough to seriously injure, but more than sufficient to scramble her sensory input and send her stumbling backward. Behind Lyra, Rexith had regained his feet, mandibles clicking in fury. His pride hurt significantly more than his face, though his face hurt quite impressively. He charged again, all four arms engaging in a combination strike pattern that his instructors had described as textbook perfect. Lyra ducked under the first two strikes, blocked the third with her forearm in a motion that should have shattered human bone but merely deflected the blow, and caught the fourth arm at the wrist. What happened next would be analyzed in slow motion by combat instructors for the next several cycles. The human used Rexith's own momentum against him, turning his strike into a fulcrum. She pivoted beneath his extended arm, maintaining her grip, and suddenly Rexith found himself airborne and inverted. The world rotated 90 degrees, then 180, and then he was slamming into the floor again, this time on his back, with all the air explosively vacating his lungs. Lyra released his arm and stepped back, giving him space to recover. "You telegraph your combinations," she observed conversationally. "Your mid-left arm drops slightly before your high right commits." In the observation gallery, a Vryn instructor made a note on his datapad, with slightly shaking appendages. Thornax had no interest in observations or teaching moments. He had interest in overwhelming force, which was his species' solution to most problems and had worked remarkably well for several thousand generations. He rushed forward, arms wide for a crushing bear hug that would end this farce immediately. Lyra ran at him. This surprised everyone, not least Thornax himself. Humans were supposed to be clever and evasive. They were not supposed to charge directly at an opponent who outmassed them by a factor of 3. At the last possible second, Lyra dropped into a slide, her momentum carrying her between Thornax's legs. As she passed beneath him, her fist drove upward with the full rotational force of her body behind it. Morvathi possessed thick hide that could stop plasma rounds. This hide was distributed evenly across their bodies, providing comprehensive protection. Except for certain sensitive areas that biology mandated remained somewhat more vulnerable. Thornax's bellow of pain rattled the gymnasium's windows. He crashed to his knees, hands moving to protect what Lyra had just introduced to the concept of blunt force trauma, his face cycling through several colors that Morvathi physiology should not have been capable of producing. "Sorry," Lyra called over her shoulder, not sounding particularly sorry. "But there are 3 of you. I need to even the odds." Zillenth had recovered her equilibrium and was recalculating frantically. The human moved like liquid, transitioned between offensive and defensive postures without telegraphing intent, and struck with precision that suggested either extensive training or combat experience, or both. The Kelthari shifted her approach, abandoning direct engagement in favor of harassment tactics. She would strike, withdraw, circle, strike again, wear the human down through accumulated damage and forced expenditure of energy. Lyra seemed to anticipate the strategy shift. She settled into a more defensive stance, hands raised, weight centered. Her breathing remained steady, deep draws through the nose and exhales through the mouth. Her heart rate, had anyone been monitoring, would have shown as elevated but controlled. Zillenth attacked in a blur of motion, her enhanced nervous system translating thought to action with minimal delay. 3 strikes in rapid succession, each targeting a different location, each withdrawn before a counter could develop. Lyra blocked 2, took the 3rd on her shoulder, and did not flinch. The observation deck had moved beyond silence into something approaching religious reverence. This was not how Deathworlder combat was supposed to function. Humans were supposed to be tough and stubborn, yes. But this human moved like she had been born in the gymnasium, which, in a sense, she had been. Zillenth pressed her advantage, strike patterns increasing in complexity and speed. The human's defenses adapted, blocks flowing into parries, parries transitioning to evasions. They moved across the combat circle in a deadly dance, neither giving ground willingly. Behind them, Rexith had climbed to his feet once more. His pride would not allow him to remain down while his companions fought. His carapace had absorbed the worst of the impacts, and Vryn possessed multiple redundant systems that made them notoriously difficult to keep down. He rejoined the engagement from Lyra's right side, coordinating with Zillenth's assault from the left. Finally, proper pack. Tactics. The human would have to divide her attention, create openings, allow them to land decisive strikes. Lyra's response was to stop defending entirely. She surged forward into Zillenth's guard, accepting a glancing blow to her ribs in exchange for getting inside the Kelthari's reach. Her hands moved in a complex series of motions that Rexith's combat training identified as a human martial art, something called jujitsu, according to his cultural briefings. Zillenth suddenly found herself entangled, her arms controlled, her balance compromised. Lyra's leg hooked behind the Kelthari's knee while her upper body drove forward. The combined motion resulted in Zillenth experiencing a controlled descent to the floor that was both technically perfect and utterly humiliating. Lyra maintained control throughout the fall, transitioning into a submission hold that immobilized Zillenth's arms and applied pressure to joints in ways that Kelthari anatomy found extremely disagreeable. "Yield?" Lyra said quietly, her voice carrying none of the earlier conversational lightness. This was the voice of someone who had done this before, many times, and knew exactly how much pressure to apply before things broke. "I yield," Zillenth responded immediately, because enhanced nervous systems made pain reception extremely detailed, and she had no interest in discovering the precise limits of her joint flexibility. Lyra released her instantly and rolled away, regaining her feet just as Rexith arrived with a flying strike that would have ended the match had it connected. It did not connect. The human ducked under the attack, let Rexith's momentum carry him past her, and delivered a precise strike to the nerve cluster at the base of his neck. It was the same target Zillenth had attempted earlier, but executed with the full understanding of Vryn neurological structure. Rexith's legs stopped receiving signals from his brain. He collapsed in a controlled heap, conscious but temporarily paralyzed from the neck down. Thornax had recovered from his earlier encounter with human striking methodology and had rejoined the fight with a roar that expressed both rage and grudging respect. The Morvathi abandoned technique entirely in favor of overwhelming aggression, throwing punches with enough force to dent starship hulls. Lyra became a blur of motion, weaving between strikes that displaced air with audible cracks. She was breathing harder now, sweat visible on her forehead, the sustained engagement beginning to tax even Deathworlder endurance. But she was smiling. That smile worried the observers more than anything else they had witnessed. It was not cruel or mocking. It was the smile of someone genuinely enjoying herself. Like this 3-on-1 combat against the Academy's elite was her idea of a relaxing evening activity. Thornaxe's fist grazed her shoulder, spinning her halfway around. Instead of recovering, Lyra used the momentum, completing the rotation and driving her elbow into Thornaxe's midsection. Morvathi hide stopped the blow from causing internal damage, but it did not stop the kinetic energy transfer. Thornaxe grunted, more surprised than hurt. Lyra followed up with a rapid series of strikes, each one targeting the same spot, each one adding incremental damage. Alone, each strike was insignificant against Morvathi durability. Combined, they created a cumulative effect that Thornaxe's nervous system could not entirely ignore. The massive cadet swung again, slower now, fatigue and accumulated pain affecting his timing. Lyra slipped inside his guard, got behind him, and jumped onto his back. What followed was less combat and more rodeo. Thornaxe bucked and spun, trying to dislodge his passenger. Lyra wrapped her legs around his torso, one arm secured around his neck, and held on with the grim determination that had allowed humanity to domesticate animals that were larger, faster, and significantly more interested in murder. "This is undignified," Thornaxe rumbled, reaching back to grab the human. "Extremely," Lyra agreed, adjusting her hold to avoid his grasping hands. "But effective. Yield?" "Morvathi do not yield." "Okay. But you are going to pass out in about 30 seconds. Blood flow to the brain is kind of important, even for you guys." Thornaxe attempted to respond, but found his voice becoming distant and tinny. His vision narrowed at the edges, darkness creeping in from the periphery. His legs wobbled. 20 seconds, Lyra updated helpfully. The mighty Morvathi took 2 more stumbling steps and collapsed forward. Lyra rode him down, maintained the hold for another few seconds, then released and rolled clear. She stood slowly, hands on her knees, breathing hard. Sweat dripped from her face, and her uniform bore scuff marks from the engagement. One of her eyebrows was bleeding slightly, where Zil-Enth had landed a good strike. Around her, 3 of the Academy's top-ranked combat cadets lay in various states of defeated confusion. The entire engagement had lasted 4 minutes and 37 seconds. The presiding instructor stepped into the circle, his expression carefully neutral. Match concluded. Medical team, attend to the injured. Medical personnel rushed onto the floor, scanners already active, checking for serious damage. Thornaxe was breathing normally and would wake in a few minutes with nothing worse than a headache and severely wounded pride. Rexith's nervous system was already rebooting, sensation returning to his extremities. Zil-Enth sat up on her own, rubbing her shoulders and staring at the human with a new expression. It looked remarkably like respect. Lyra walked to the edge of the combat circle, grabbed a water bottle someone had left on the sidelines, and drank deeply. Her hands, observers noted, were absolutely steady despite the extended combat. The observation gallery had erupted in chaos. Voices raised in 17 different languages, some angry, some excited, all confused. Several cadets were frantically reviewing footage on their personal devices, trying to understand what they had just witnessed. In one corner, a group of Vryn instructors huddled together, their mandibles clicking in agitated discussion. "Did you see her footwork?" The joint manipulation was textbook perfect, better than textbook. 4 minutes against 3 elite combatants. By the ancestors, what do they teach on that Deathworld? The answer, had they asked, was survival. Earth was a planet that had been trying to murder its inhabitants since they first climbed down from trees. Predators that hunted in packs, diseases that mutated faster than medicine could adapt, weather systems that could erase cities, other humans who had proven remarkably creative in developing new ways to kill each other. Humanity had responded by becoming very, very good at violence, not out of malice or aggression, but as a simple survival skill, like learning to swim or start fires. Every human child learned to fall safely, to roll with impact, to understand leverage and balance. Most studied at least basic self-defense. Those who pursued it seriously, as Lyra had, became something that made the galaxy uncomfortable. They became efficient. The presiding instructor approached Lyra as the medical team cleared the other combatants from the floor. An impressive performance, Cadet. Thank you, sir. Though perhaps excessively so. This was meant to be a learning opportunity, not a demonstration of complete dominance. Lyra took another drink of water, considering her response. Sir, they came at me 3-on-1. If I had held back, they would not have learned the lesson they needed to learn. And what lesson is that? That Deathworld classification cuts both ways. Yes, our planet is dangerous, but that danger makes us dangerous too. She glanced at the 3 recovering cadets. They thought I was a liability. Now they know different. The instructor made a noise that might have been approval or indigestion. With Talnari, it was difficult to tell. You could have simply defeated them. The additional commentary was unnecessary. Respectfully disagree, sir. I need them to understand that this wasn't luck or berserker rage. I knew what I was doing every second. They need to process that. You are making enemies, Cadet. With respect, sir, I am making them think. There is a difference. The instructor regarded her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Dismissed. Report to medical for a standard post-combat evaluation. Lyra saluted, finished her water, and headed for the exit. The crowd parted before her, cadets from a dozen species suddenly finding themselves with urgent business elsewhere. In the medical bay, Thornax sat on an examination table, his massive frame making the furniture look like children's toys. A scanner hummed over his torso, checking for internal damage. She fights like a demon, he rumbled to Rexith, who occupied the next table over. She fights like someone who has done this many times before. Rexith corrected, his mandibles clicking softly. Did you see how she adapted? Every exchange she learned and adjusted. Zilenth stood nearby, having declined a table because Kelthari pride required remaining vertical when possible. I ran combat predictions throughout the entire engagement. She should not have been able to maintain that performance level. Her heart rate should have spiked, her decision-making should have degraded, she should have made mistakes. But she did not, Thornax noted. No, she did not. Zilenth's expression shifted to something approaching academic curiosity. I wished to review the engagement footage. There are 17 distinct moments where her tactical decisions contradicted optimal choices, according to my predictions. Yet each resulted in advantageous positioning. She was not following collective combat doctrine. Rexith said slowly, understanding dawning. She was following human doctrine, which we do not have in our training databases. We do now, Thornax pointed out. That entire engagement was recorded. The 3 cadets looked at each other, wounded pride giving way to professional interest. They had been beaten, decisively, but they had also witnessed something remarkable. The human had not simply overcome them through superior physicality. She had outthought them, outadapted them, and done it while maintaining tactical awareness against 3 simultaneous threats. It was, they grudgingly admitted, impressive. In her quarters later that evening, Lyra sat at her desk, reviewing her own combat footage. Every mistake catalogued, every inefficiency noted. She had performed adequately, but adequately was not good enough. Earth had taught her that lesson early and repeatedly. Her personal communicator chimed, displaying a message from her instructor. "Congratulations on your victory. Be advised that formal challenge requests from other cadets have increased by 400% in the past 3 hours. You have made yourself very popular." Lyra smiled at that, reading the subtext clearly. She had proven herself, yes, but she had also painted a target on her back. Every cadet who thought they could do better than Rexith's team would want to try. Good. She needed the practice. Her fingers moved across the keyboard, typing a response. "I look forward to meeting them, sir. My schedule has plenty of openings." She sent the message, shut down her terminal, and prepared for sleep. Tomorrow would bring classes on starship operations, xenobiology, and diplomatic protocol. The usual academy curriculum designed to turn raw cadets into collective officers. But tonight, in gymnasiums and common rooms across the academy, conversations were happening in hushed tones in 17 languages. Did you see how she moved? The speed was remarkable, but the precision was terrifying. 3 of them, 3 elite combatants, 4 minutes. They say her planet has gravity 30% higher than standard. They say her planet has predators that hunt in coordinated packs. They say her species went from throwing rocks to splitting atoms in 10,000 cycles. 10,000. What kind of species does that? A dangerous one. In the faculty lounge, instructors held their own discussions with considerably more context and significantly less hyperbole. "We need to adjust our training protocols," the Vryn combat master insisted. "If one human can perform at that level, others will follow. We cannot have them dominating every physical competition." "Why not?" asked the Talneri strategic instructor. "The Academy's purpose is to produce excellent officers. If humans excel in combat roles, that serves the collective's interests. It serves the collective's interests if other species do not begin viewing humans as threats rather than allies," the Vryn countered. "There is already talk. Deathworlder. Aggressive. Dangerous. We must be careful how this perception develops." The Talneri instructor regarded his colleague with the patience of someone who had been teaching warfare for longer than most species had possessed spaceflight. "The perception is already developed. Earth's classification is public knowledge. The question is not whether humans are dangerous. Their planet has answered that. The question is whether they are honorable, trustworthy, and committed to collective ideals. And today's demonstration proves that? Today's demonstration proves that when challenged, that particular human responded with precisely calibrated force, stopped immediately when opponents yielded, and showed concern for their well-being afterward. That, colleague, is exactly what we want in collective officers." The conversation continued late into the night, as such conversations did, rehashing the same points from different angles while the binary stars wheeled overhead and the Academy continued its eternal orbit through neutral space. In the years that followed, historians would point to that evening as a turning point in human collective relations. The moment when humanity stopped being the new member, the uncertain addition, the species that maybe did not quite belong. 3 cadets had challenged the Deathworlder to prove a point. She had proven a different one entirely. The galaxy had spent centuries believing that civilized behavior and physical prowess were inversely correlated. That species became refined and cultured by leaving violence behind. That true advancement meant transcending one's aggressive instincts. Earth had not transcended anything. Humanity had simply learned to aim their aggression more carefully. In the gymnasium the next morning, Lyra arrived early for her scheduled combat practice. The space was empty, except for one figure waiting in the combat circle. Cadet Rexith Voran stood at attention, all four arms held in the formal Vryn salute. "I wish to request training," he said as Lyra approached. "Last night, you identified flaws in my combination patterns. I would learn to correct them." Lyra studied him for a moment, noting the sincerity in his stance, the absence of wounded pride in his voice. She smiled. "Sure," she said, stepping into the circle. "But I warn you, I am a terrible teacher. I tend to demonstrate by example." "I learn best through pain and repetition," Rexith replied. "Then we will get along perfectly." They began to spar, slowly at first, Lyra walking him through the mechanical flaws in his technique. Other cadets began to arrive for their scheduled sessions, stopping to watch the Deathworlder working patiently with the Vryn who had challenged her just hours before. Word spread, as it always did. By the end of the week, Lyra's informal combat classes had a waiting list. By the end of the month, the Academy had formally added human close combat doctrine to the curriculum. By the end of the year, 17 species had revised their threat assessment protocols regarding Earth. And somewhere, in neutral space, orbiting a binary star system that belonged to no one and everyone, the Kavarian Stellar Military Academy continued its mission of producing excellent officers. It just had to adjust its definition of excellence to account for the fact that sometimes the scariest thing in the galaxy wore a ponytail and called itself human. The 3 cadets who had learned this lesson firsthand graduated with honors, went on to distinguished careers in the collective military, and never, ever forgot the day they hit the wall before the bell rang.